Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from May 3rd to May 9th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, make sure you subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news developments and the facts in one place so that you can watch, get used to the industry, learn about the companies, and then take advantage whenever you are ready. So we're going to start this week with cannabis sales showing strong growth in March. So we're going to highlight some of the East Coast and West Coast states and how they performed in March as we now head into May. Crazy how fast this year is going by, but the good news is cannabis growth surged in 8 of the 10 markets that BDSA covers in March. In this review, we will look at the markets one by one, beginning with the more mature Western markets and concluding with the Eastern ones. So keep in mind, these markets are still a mixed bag. Some are legal for only medical use, while some have been legal for medical and then recreational use for a long time. And then we've got the new emerging markets that have had medical legal beforehand, and they've recently legalized adult use. So we get to see just how much of an impact that recent adult use legalization actually has on these markets. So BDSA provides coverage for Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon. In March, growth ranged from -3 in Arizona, looking at their medical only, to 50% in Nevada compared to a year ago. So we'll start with Arizona, and keep in mind that the state has not sorted out their finances well enough yet for recreational sales to be releasing this information publicly. And that's normal. It takes time for that. Hopefully we can get to see that sooner. But let's highlight. Arizona transitioned to adult use in late January, and BDSA is projecting only medical sales, which rose 3% from February to 74.3 million and fell 11% from a year ago. Flower sales fell 8%, while pre-rolls increased 14%. Concentrates declined 11%, and ingestibles plunged by 25%. Now, if Arizona just legalized adult use, why would their sales fall? Now again, this is just because BDSA is only looking at Arizona's medical. And so this shows March 2021 at about 74 million. And then if we look at March 2020, the numbers are even higher. Because in March 2020, Arizona did not have legal adult use. Therefore, you could only get cannabis through the medical route. So what happens, like in Canada, when you legalize for recreational or adult use, some people stop going the medical route because they know what they need and they just cut straight to the recreational market. So I wanted to highlight that as the difference and the reason for the decline here, but also this is just medical. This does not account for the estimated 35 million in recreational sales that Arizona did for adult use, which would bring this to an all-new high. So just wanted to point that out to put some context there. Now California set a record with sales of $349 million, growing 22% sequentially and 27% from a year ago. In February, annual growth had slowed to 17%, partially impacted by the comparison to a year ago, which had an extra day. Flower grew 32%, while pre-rolls surged 54%. Concentrates increased 21%, and ingestibles expanded by 11% compared to a year ago. Now, I want to point out too, every time you look at these charts, notice February. It seems to be a very important staple, highlighting the growth change year over year. So just as we go through, keep an eye on February 2021, which looks, under 300 and something million, to February 2022, which is just under 250 million. If we go back up to Arizona, we can see February was quite a dip, but it still did surpass last year. So February sort of seems to be the marker for year-over-year growth. Now, if we look at Colorado, and again, just to highlight, California and Colorado are the mature states that have had legalized cannabis use in California for adult use. California since 2016. In Colorado since 2012. Sales increased 19% sequentially and 22% from a year ago to reach 199 million. Flower sales grew 16%, with pre-rolls gaining 42%. Concentrates expanded by 29%, and ingestibles gained 28%. So if you want to look for real year-over-year growth in Colorado, let's say roughly 170 million, up from February 2020 to 145 million. So that is a nice jump, especially in Colorado, the most mature market with just 6 million people. Obviously a big destination for tourism, but the strongest case for growth once you get an industry established and working for you. Now, Nevada has also posted record sales with growth of 50% compared to a year ago when tourists had abandoned Las Vegas. Sequentially, sales grew 21% to 84 million. Flower grew 56% with pre-rolls gaining 20%. Concentrates grew 57% and ingestibles expanded by 46%. So if we look February 2021 compared to February 2020, and then obviously in March, travel was shut down, the world sort of flipped upside down, and Nevada saw suffered a lot because of that. You can see the sales are rebounding as things are getting back to normal, showing that this industry is quite resilient. And then in Oregon, at least in the mature markets, with sales reaching record of 109 million, year-over-year growth exceeded 29%, up 23% from February. Flower grew 26%, with pre-rolls growing 52%. Concentrates expanded by 38%, and ingestibles increased 14%. And so looking at February 2021, sales look to be about 90 million combined with adult use and recreational in Oregon. Then if we compare it to February of 2020, where it's about 65 million, steady growth year over year. And again, just to point out, these are the more mature markets: Oregon, Nevada, Colorado, and California, especially these top two, which just goes to show once you get the system sorted out and you get all the infrastructure set in place, you're pretty much printing money over time because you're supplying the demand the right way. Now, if we look at Eastern markets, in the newer markets, the annual rate of growth picked up in 2 of the 3 markets after having declined during February in all 3. Note that we wrote about March data for Illinois based on the state's data a month ago. So these numbers are just looking at March. They've not included April in here yet, although we do know the April adult use sales, which I featured in my video on Wednesday. You can check that link out below, but it was about 114 million, up from 109. BDSA provides more comprehensive data than the state, breaking into product types. The state hasn't yet released the medical sales, but adult use sales grew by 5% sequentially and expanded 209% from a year ago. And note that BDSA has begun providing data for Florida and Michigan. Love it. So let's look at Illinois, and this is a prime example of a state that just recently legalized adult use, so you really see the difference in adding those recreational adult use sales to their total addressable sales. Illinois grew 31% sequentially from February to March, and then 5% from March to April, and increased 120% from a year ago, reaching almost $145 million. Flower sales grew 162%, while pre-rolls expanded 214%. Concentrates increased 91%, and ingestibles gained 74% from a year ago. So if we look at February 2021, a year into legalization for adult use after February 2020, 60 million up to 110, a little under 110 million. That is where you see the growth come. And Arizona has, again, just legalized for adult use, so we can expect to see some sales like this start to increase as the months go on. But wanted to point that out. Now, Maryland, also worth noting that this is only a medical market. There is no adult use allowed in Maryland yet. So for that reason, Maryland was the only state to see annual growth slow, with sales of 48 million, its highest month to date, expanding 17% sequentially and 43% compared to a year ago. In February, the state has seen sales grow by 50%. Flower grew 53%, while pre-rolls grew 30%, concentrates increased 45%, and ingestibles grew by 49%. Looking at February 2021 compared to February of 2020, roughly, let's say 27 million up to 42 million, 41 million, still significant growth. In Massachusetts, sales soared to a record 124 million, up 24% sequentially and 92% from a year ago, a month in which adult use sales were halted during the last week. Flower grew 82%, while pre-rolls gained 121%, concentrates expanded 88%, and ingestibles grew 104%. So as we can see sequentially, a big jump, 24% from February 2021 to March 2021. But if we compare February 2021 to March 2020, this is obviously pre the Rona situation, still very steady growth from, say, 65 to 70 million upwards to 100 million. So legalizing that adult use market makes a big difference, and this is a great snapshot at all the states to show that the growth is very strong and it's just going to keep going. Now, Credit Suisse stops custodian service for some U.S. cannabis stock, sources say. So, this could be a bit of an explanation as to why we've seen prices fall for such a long period of time. So let's dive into this. Credit Suisse has told customers in recent months it will no longer execute transaction in shares of cannabis companies with U.S. operations or hold them on behalf of clients, a cannabis company executive and other industry sources told Reuters on Wednesday. The Swiss lender was among a handful of banks that had been willing to buy and sell cannabis-related stocks for clients in the U.S. and hold those shares as a custodian. Credit Suisse, however, has declined to comment. Cannabis remains illegal under U.S. federal law, even though many states have legalized its use. This represents a legal risk for investment banks working for companies that produce or trade the drug. Now, to be totally fair, I thought this would only apply to investment banks in America, where the federal government could prosecute them for working with cannabis companies. I did not think this applied to investment banks outside of America. I don't know if it does, but this is what this signals to me. If you know anything about it, let me know, because that's quite interesting. Mind you, we'll keep going with the story, but just wanted to point that out. Credit Suisse's compliance and risk management procedures have come under scrutiny from investors and analysis after it lost at least $4.7 billion from the collapse of Archegos, an investment firm dedicated to managing the fortune of hedge fund veteran Bill Hwang, as well as the suspension of funds linked to insolvent supply chain finance company Greensill. Okay, so this tells us Credit Suisse has been in hot water. So they want to make sure they don't make any further mistakes and minimize their downside risk based on this big screw up. So MSOS Exchange, the MSOS Exchange Traded Fund, which tracks U.S. cannabis stocks, has fallen by more than a fifth or 20% since early February. Several market players said they believed Credit Suisse's actions played a role in the sell-off. When Credit Suisse pulled custodian services on cannabis stocks, a number of large investors in the space lost their ability to custodian the stocks, said Abner Curtin, CEO of newly floated cannabis grower Ascend Wellness Holdings, Inc. That led to a significant sell-off. A custodian bank holds customer securities for safekeeping to prevent them from being stolen or lost, while also collecting dividends and handling other corporate actions. It plays an important role in helping many investors to hold shares in companies. Just like many brokerage firms do the same thing for us, they buy it first and then they sell it to us through them so that we don't have to go through putting our name on it and all that. We buy it through the brokerage firm or the bank, the investment firm that we purchase through. Now, just to note, the cannabis industry has boomed over the last 3 years as Canada and a succession of U.S. states, including most recently New York, New Jersey, legalized recreational use. So, to be fair, let's say Credit Suisse invested in this space pre-March 2020 or around March 2020 when it hit its bottoms. And therefore, since then, they would have seen significant profits if they did invest in March 2020 or around that area and held until February. They would see some massive gains. So, since Credit Suisse shares are down over 20% because of that hiccup with Bill Hwang losing all that money so far this year, and the bank has said it is cutting its prime brokerage business, which caters to hedge funds clients, by about a third, all this tells me is that since that big hiccup caused such an uproar, they, again, just need to minimize their downside risk. So what this means is they likely sold a lot of their cannabis holdings, or because they're no longer being a custodian for it, that forced a lot of their investors to sell for profits, but sell, which likely explains the sell-off, and highlighting why I hope you were buying the dip, because it wasn't Joe Schmo and Nancy selling their shares. It was, banks taking profits because they need to cover their butts based on other mistakes that they've done, and they don't want to risk having the federal government or the federal U.S. government come after them, which I didn't think was a thing if you're not a U.S. lender. Anyways, that does explain the price declines recently. So, friendly reminder from Todd Harrison that U.S. cannabis jobs are not counted in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. I did not know that, but that will change, thankfully, as cannabis becomes accepted. Up from 325,000 jobs in 2020. We're apparently at 375,000 jobs now, close to 1 million soon, hopefully by 2024, 2025. Dang, if only there was some sort of a solution hanging around, like ending prohibition, so that the states that need it the most can help contribute to this number of jobs. Time will tell. Now, Roth on cannabis, consumer cannabis State of the Union, legislative tailwinds, and positioned for second half strength. Ahead of calendar Q1 or first quarter 2020 earnings, we lay out the cannabis landscape and what we believe will be key catalysts for the back half of the best position stocks. While we come to expect a little sensationality and lingering COVID impact, muted Q4 and Q1 growth, we continue to stay with our thesis laid out in our January 2021 outlook that U.S. operators will benefit from access to capital, institutional capital, M&A, new states, and scaled operations, which in turn will lead to multiple expansion. We now expect a strengthening fundamental outlook for second half of 2021 will provide the biggest catalyst for the sector on top of potential U.S. federal legalization to drive continued sidelined interest leading up to potential U.S. exchange and investment unlocking. We expect the pace of M&A activity to drive multiple expansion, while valuations remain compelling for outsized 20% compounded annual growth rate industry growth through 2025. So the big picture outlook, pullback provides compelling investment opportunity. I completely agree. And again, I see this as foreshadowing, basically saying what the investment firms plan to do once they're allowed to invest. Next. Todd shares from Stifel as well. And main thing, I use Todd as a reference, but it's because he firsthand gets access to these reports from the investment firms. He shares them on Twitter. And because they're public in there, I share them on here, hoping it'll help you. So for Q1 2021 preview from Stifel, industry sales came in higher than we expected, partly due to stimulus checks, with preliminary trends suggesting the positive momentum extended into April. For states core to our coverage with state-backed or headset data, Illinois, Nevada, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Florida, and California, industry sales came in 8% higher than we expected. Excuse me. Booyah. Next up from Pi Financial, our top picks within our coverage universe. From our coverage list, see comp table, we recommend investors increasing holdings in Columbia Care, exposure in Arizona, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia, Cresco Labs, exposure in Arizona and New York, Air Wellness, exposure in Arizona and New Jersey, Jushi Holdings, exposure in Virginia, and Trulieve Cannabis, exposure in Connecticut. So Columbia Care increasing their buy rating to $19. Again, these are all Canadian, as these are the Canadian tickers. Cresco Labs raising the buy rating to $23. Air Wellness buy rating to $60 a share. Juicy Holdings buy rating to $14 a share. And Trulieve Cannabis increased the buy rating to $85 a share. All speculative, of course, but hey, that's the name of the game. Buy the ticket, take the ride. And lastly, we've got BTIG previewing Curaleaf, increasing their buy rating and a price target to $34, which is quite a significant increase from their current price of $18.20 a share Canadian, based on strong state data supporting Q1 revenue upside. New York flower sales coming soon. Again, that's not soon, that's a year from now. Reiterate by $34. Now, just to point out though, Curaleaf is the largest MSO, therefore it's the most expensive based on its current market cap and what it's projected to do in sales in the next coming years. But still, a $34 price increase from $18, almost 100% upside if, let's say, BTIG starts to push the price up to this level. Just pointing that out though. Obviously though, when we do see price increases or price target increases, it's a good sign, I think, for the industry. So wanted to share that all with you. Now on to some news about Schumer committing to federal legalization at New York City Cannabis Parade. Now apparently he's committed to it. If you don't believe he hasn't already committed to it, he's been doing it since February, but he's really trying to put his intention out there. And I mean, again, if whether a politician's good, whether a politician's bad, you're doing your job as a politician if you're showing that you hear the people and you're putting your intent out there, that you're making change happen and putting work towards that's going to help the people. So, you know, I'm not going to speak for Schumer. He speaks for himself, but I'm just going to play this clip to highlight what was said at his recent New York cannabis rally.
And as we know, he has been teasing forthcoming legislation with Senators Wyden and Booker since about February. He said that it will bring the same type of focus to racial and economic justice as the MRTA brought in New York. And Schumer, whose personal perspective on legalization has evolved quite rapidly recently, did in fact then call for full federal legalization. So take a listen to what he had to say.
Justice Brandeis called the states the laboratory of democracy. And on marijuana, they have served just that role. Right on. We have taken the legalization to the laboratories of democracy. We did the experiments and the results are in. What we have accomplished in New York is just the beginning. Amen. I will fight with you until we get fair, just, and full legalization.
So obviously that video coming from right within the rally, but he was essentially calling for full legalization on the federal level, saying that he would fight for it.
You mentioned that he teased legalization in terms of legislation, but did he say specifically when we could expect a bill and when it'll actually pass?
You know, yes, he has been talking about this since February. I did have a chance to catch him after he spoke, and I did ask him about a timeline, and he said that they are putting the, quote, final touches on the bill, and it will come in a few weeks, although we have been hearing this, as I mentioned, since February, so it's been coming in a few weeks for quite some time now. As for whether it will pass, however, you know, he has the authority to put a bill on the floor. He said he'll do everything he can to get passed. He did seem pretty confident, however, that changes in sentiment nationwide will sort of fuel his efforts and kind of add to the momentum, you know, on the federal level with lawmakers in Congress. So take a listen to what he had to say about that.
We got support across the country. Did you hear about South Dakota?
Yeah, shocker, right?
Hardly a liberal bastion. They voted to legalize.
The people want it.
So this is happening across the country.
Oh, we're on schedule. Holy shit.
We're going to get bipartisan support for our legislation.
Yeah.
And we got to do it the right way. The right way.
Now here's my take, and this is a very bold prediction. Chances are I'm going to be wrong, but I just wanted to say it because it makes sense to me, and I want to put it out there because it's interesting enough, and I don't know much about playing the game of politics, but it seems like he's going to get this done because he doesn't care about Senate Majority Leader after 2022. He knows if he keeps his word for the people and pulls this off, he's got a shot at winning Schumer 2024. What do you think? Now, let's move on to the boring stuff, but we do got to get through it. Biden's Attorney General stresses that cannabis use in legal states is not a Justice Department priority. Yes, this is the type of language without actual language you want to hear from the Attorney General. As basically, this is him saying, without directly saying it, use your discretion, but leave individual cannabis consumers alone. Attorney General Merrick Garland on Tuesday reaffirmed that he does not feel the Department of Justice should be using its limited resources to go after people using cannabis in compliance with state law. During a House Appropriations Subcommittee meeting, Representative Mike Garcia asked the official about what steps his agency could take to stop transnational organizations from illicitly cultivating cannabis and stealing natural resources for their grow operations. Garland said that he's not precisely familiar with the specifics of that issue, but it is certainly within our jurisdiction and within our scope of concern to go after cannabis growing operations that violate state law. So if they're doing that, go after them. But while curtailing large-scale illicit traffickers is something the department will pursue, the Attorney General said people using cannabis in legal states is not a worthwhile endeavor. The department's view on cannabis use is that enforcement against use is not a good use of our resources, Garland says. So again, that's individual use. And I understand that's not what you're asking. You're talking about growing and manufacturing at a large scale. It's probably not a good use of our resources where it's regulated by the state. And again, I take it that's not what you're asking. So to the extent you're asking for examples about transnational operations of large amounts coming from Mexico or transnational operators who are coming into the U.S. to do the growing, these are certainly within our jurisdictions and within our scope of concern. It seems like police or law enforcers don't have a very good ability to use their discretion. They just want to stick to protocol. But you gotta love that coming from the Attorney General, calling for law enforcers to stop abusing their powers against people who are complying with state law. Next, Alabama medical cannabis bill heads to the governor's desk following legislators' approval. Congratulations, Alabama. A bill to legalize medical cannabis in Alabama is headed to the governor's desk following its passage by the legislator. After clearing two House committees last month, the measure passed the full chamber by a vote of 68 to 34 on Thursday. The Senate, which had previously approved an earlier version of the legislation in March, then signed off on the other body's change in a 20-9 vote. The win came after opponents staged a lengthy filibuster on the House floor earlier this week, drawing out the process by making a series of speeches and asking questions until the end of the day's session at midnight approached. Those stalling tactics did not continue on Thursday, however. Sponsored by Senator Tim Melson, the bill would allow people with qualifying conditions to access cannabis for therapeutic uses. To qualify for the program, patients would have to be diagnosed with one of about 20 conditions, including anxiety, sleep disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and intractable pain. Regulators would not be able to independently add additional conditions, leaving that decision up to lawmakers in future sessions. Now it's up to Governor Kay Ivey, who has not said whether or not she will sign or veto the bill, but you hope that she will do what will help her constituents out. Next, in Louisiana, House votes to legalize medical cannabis flower and advances bill to prepare for recreational legalization. Huge. Louisiana House of Representatives on Monday approved a bill that would expand the state's current limited medical cannabis program by allowing patients to purchase whole flower cannabis. They also advanced another proposal that would establish licensing fees for recreational cannabis if the state opts to legalize it under separate legislation. Members additionally gave the green light to a measure that's meant to align Louisiana's hemp program with the federal rules for the crop that were finalized and took effect under the U.S. Department of Agriculture last month. Lawmakers in the state have been advancing a series of medical cannabis reform bills in recent weeks, but arguably the most consequential measure is one of Representative Richard Nelson's that would establish a recreational cannabis market in the state. That legislation was approved by the House Administration of Criminal Justice Committee last week and is expected to come to the floor for consolidation later this week. Awesome. Now, not all great news though, as limited Tennessee medical cannabis compromise bill heads to the governor's desk. This is still good. This is progress, although it's a very limited bill. The Tennessee legislature on Wednesday sent the governor a bill to expand the state's limited CBD program and create a commission to study broader medical cannabis legalization. The legislation represents a compromise between reform supporters and opponents, though advocates remain disappointed that more comprehensive medical cannabis legalization measures were rejected in committees earlier this session. Under the proposal, a 9-member commission would be tasked with analyzing federal and state cannabis laws and helping to prepare legislation to legalize medical cannabis. The measure states that implementing a medical cannabis market would be incumbent on Congress rescheduling the plant, which to me is a big no-no because the states do not need to wait for daddy, the federal government, to tell them what to do. That's not how the U.S. was designed to work. States are the experiment of democracy, and they're allowed to create laws based on what their constituents want. and in theory, as long as it didn't conflict with the federal government. However, the federal laws against cannabis are severely outdated, and we are on the precipice of a new chapter. So at some point, you just got to take initiative and be brave and know that you're doing the right thing. But sadly, it just goes to show that many states and many politicians in power do not see things that way. And they are the reason why progress takes so long to get the wheel spinning. But regardless, the Senate approved the bill by a vote of 19-12 on Tuesday. Then the House cleared it in a 74-17 vote on Wednesday. But sadly, prior to final passage, the House defeated a proposed change to remove the Senate's language on waiting for a federal policy change before establishing a medical cannabis program. So officially in Tennessee, they are going to wait until cannabis is deschedulized. So basically, out of all of this work, you've just gotten permission to start studying cannabis. Reform comes in all shapes and sizes. Sadly, more of this nonsense prevails because it does in some places where people remain stubborn. Wisconsin governor's cannabis legalization proposal stripped from budget by GOP-led committee. A GOP-led Wisconsin committee on Thursday voted to scrap the governor's budget proposal to legalize cannabis in the state, one of nearly 400 provisions that were eliminated. In a vote of 12-4, the Joint Finance Committee removed language that would establish an adult-use cannabis market and medical cannabis system. The move was widely anticipated in the Republican-controlled legislature, so they expected this, and it's led to calls from Governor Tony Evers and other Democratic policymakers to have residents put pressure on their representatives to support the administration's agenda. So, hey, if you live in Wisconsin and you wanted cannabis legalized because it's the right thing to do at this point, the jobs, the tax revenue, and all that, pass it on. Wisconsin Republicans just voted to kill cannabis legalization. Now, this is a fun story, and I want to highlight how some people's fears can often play against them. So, let me get into character. "We don't want them using the playground as a place to party," said Sherry Dowdy about a cannabis consumption lounge that is set up to open about 400 feet away from the Montessori school she operates on the edge of downtown Arbor. Well, as an educator, Sherry, your ignorance is showing that you don't know the first thing about cannabis, because cannabis and alcohol are not one and the same, and their effects are very, very different. Dowdy said she understands people using cannabis for pain and ailments, but she's concerned about the recreational cannabis lounge being so close to the school that has been a fixture in the neighborhood for decades. If people will be milling around outdoors, and if that will impact our staff and our children, she said. Look, Sherry, you live in Michigan, so for 6 months of the year, like in Canada, no one's just hanging around outdoors. And secondly, this might be relieving to you to find out that no one cares about your school. Only you and the parents of the kids that send them there are the ones that care. No one else does. So by highlighting your fear, you're actually inviting sick people that might want to take advantage of people that are afraid of something and that are willing to say that on the air. But point being is, if you just trust and believe that things will continue to go well as they should, there's a good chance that they will. And the Holistic Industries Consumption Lounge will be adjacent to their retail dispensary, Liberty Ann Arbor, which has already been operating on Ashley Street. A spokesperson said the hours for the lounge are expected to be from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. We're thrilled to bring Michigan's first cannabis consumption lounge to Ann Arbor to create a one-of-a-kind experience for the many people in Ann Arbor who agree that life is better with cannabis, the spokesperson said in a statement to 7 Action News. By providing a safe, designated space for consumption, we are helping remove some of the potential roadblocks cannabis patients and customers face after they purchase products and want to consume them. And just on top of that, Ken Land, a therapist who owns a nearby house that he's converted into offices, including his own, says he found it hard to object to the dispensary when it first opened because he supports the legalization of cannabis use. But still, Land had concerns. "I don't want a bunch of potheads walking around acting like a bunch of fools, would you?" he asked. "That's fair. And hey, we just got to try this out so that we can prove that that's not going to happen." Land figured he should have a positive approach and tried to work with his newer neighbors in the cannabis industry to make the best of it. Love it, Land. Thinking for yourself, brother. If they get out of line, I'll get crabby, but if they don't, live and let live. It's unclear how soon the lounge would open, but this is great because this is a precedent for lounges in other states. On top of that, Harvest Health and Recreation announced it'll hold its first quarter 2021 earnings call tomorrow, May 10th, 2021, before the market opens, highlighting their sales from January, February, and March. So I'm very excited for that as a Harvest shareholder. And on top of that, Harvest announces they've opened their 7th Florida dispensary in Olympia Heights. Highlighting their continued expansion outside of their main staple, which is Arizona, we are pleased to open our 7th Harvest location in Florida, one of the fastest growing medical markets in the U.S., said CEO Steve White. We look forward to serving patients and providing quality products at this new location in one of our core markets. On top of that, Trulieve brings medical cannabis to Osprey, announcing today opening of a brand new Florida dispensary, the company's 87th in the state of Florida alone. On top of that, if we look at the Office of Medical Cannabis Use for the last month in Florida, we can see the qualified patients have increased from, I believe it was 444,000. Sorry, I wrote this down somewhere, so let me check. Roughly 7,000 more patients, up from 544,000, to 551,000, while the number of qualified physicians has decreased actually from 2,553 a few weeks ago to 2,345. So interestingly enough, they're losing physicians, but they keep gaining patients at an exponential rate. So hey, if you're a doctor and you want opportunity, consider moving to Florida. Good place to own your practice. And as we can see down here, highlighting the sales, Trulieve has 82 dispensaries in Florida, 87 nationwide. Now here, this is the one thing though, like Harvest, it says they've got 8 as opposed to 7, so not exactly sure about the disconnect there. Hopefully in time they will fix that, but nonetheless, sales continue to be strong. And just want to point out that there is fluctuation between these sales. Some weeks they sell more, some weeks they sell less, but the main thing is that the patient growth month over month or week over week continues growing, because think of a market, Florida, of 21 million people. Only 551,000 of them so far have discovered cannabis as a brilliant alternative, as the brilliant alternative that it is. So there's a lot more where that came from. And TerrAscend announces opening the largest apothecarium on the East Coast. They announced the grand opening of its second New Jersey medical cannabis dispensary, which I imagine once New Jersey creates their adult use market and that infrastructure, that will be able to capitalize and sell through that as well. But the 6,500 square foot dispensary located Springfield Avenue in Maplewood features interactive product displays and a large bud bar where consumers or customers can see and smell flower products before purchasing. Patients can access a wide selection of TerrAscend's Kind Tree flower, vapes, and syringes, as well as an assortment of other brands. A designated express pickup area for online orders and digital menus in the lobby make for quick and easy shopping. To say that we're excited about the opening of the Apothecarium Maplewood would be an understatement, said Jason Wild, chairman of TerrAscend. So exciting news for MSOs. Now over to Canada briefly, as major broker-dealers issued a mixed bag of price target changes following the closing of the TLRY and Aphria merger. Now obviously since February highs, where that came out of nowhere, clearly wasn't justified, and we just didn't know how long that was going to last. Didn't end up lasting long. We've seen Canadian LP prices slowly drift back down. And there's been a lot of buzz of what would happen to Aphria once they've become TLRY. Well, yesterday, 2 broker-dealers issued TLRY new price targets. These are the first price target changes since the transaction was completed, and we have highlighted them below. Stifel lowered its price target to $16 from $21. CIBC raised its price target to $25 from $23, and Jeffries changed its rating to buy from sell and raised the price target to $23 from $4.77. Now again, I just want to reiterate, this is the price for TLRY, what the company was before the merger, and now they're happy to raise it to 23 because when you think about it, TLRY got Aphria, the best Canadian LP. So now TLRY is actually valuable, because if you were bullish on Aphria beforehand, now you're even more bullish, especially in terms of what Aphria can do and compete going forward with Canopy. Now, this is just a video worth showing from their Jeffries analyst.
Changed almost overnight with the acquisition of Aphria.
Well, I mean, the key thing here is we were buyers on Aphria prior to the merger, and we think the combined company, when putting TLRY through the Aphria infrastructure, creates an even stronger proposition. So, I mean, if we had to highlight 3 things specifically that support the buy, number 1, sales growth outlook, very attractive. So on our numbers from pro forma 21 into 2023, we see the company growing at an average of 33% a year.
And this is again because Ontario, Canada's most populated province, is opening 120 stores a month, which means by the end of this year, 2021, December, there will be over 1,000 stores, and that's going to make a significant difference in sales.
It's the market share leader in Canada, where industry trends are also set to accelerate after disappointing the last couple of years. And then in Europe, the combined company for us is ticking all the boxes with regard to what will be needed to succeed. And so, although the European market remains very small right now, in our view, it should not be overlooked and has the potential to be significant. Then you've got attractive optionality in US THC.
Sure.
Legislative developments there may allow entry sooner rather than later. And then it's valuation. So, I mean, it's trading on a next 12-month EV to sales of 8.2. Our implied price target is 13.2. We think more than justified when you consider closest peers, Kronos and Canopy, on 15.1 and 12.7 respectively.
So it sounds...
So when you compare an even stronger new company to, again, Canopy and Kronos, this puts them ahead of the pack. And the same reasons why I invested in Aphria in the first place doesn't change. Dominance in Canada, dominance in Europe, move to the US when that becomes available. So wanted to highlight that as it was just a great little snippet highlighting all the information as to why Tilray is still the top LP in Canada. Now let's do a world tour pushing a global revolution. Israel's cannabis market moves towards promising recreational reform. Israel's cannabis market is expected to undergo significant changes soon. Very little detail in here though, so I'm just going to read this one paragraph. Israel's cannabis market is finally moving into a recreational box this year. Sometime this year, if all goes as planned, the country will implement a recreational system for adults over 21. In a page from the American state market, deliveries will be allowed, although cannabis edibles that resemble candy will be banned. There will also be state control of prices to ensure that customers do not return to illicit sales channel. Not sure how well that's going to work, but until we get more information, just wanted to highlight that. So good job, Israel. On top of that, out of France, French lawmaker displays a cannabis joint in parliament as a new report calls for legalization. So French lawmaker caused a stir on Tuesday when he brandished a cannabis joint on the floor of the National Assembly, denouncing the criminalization of cannabis and calling for a policy change. It's like the French version of me that decided to get into politics and put up with all that crap. Deputy Francois Michel Lambert said prohibition is a total failure and that legalization would make it possible to dry up trafficking, create tax revenues, and create jobs, before showcasing a cup with cannabis leaf on it and then pulling a joint from it. Other countries have chosen to face the problem rather than the ostrich policy of keeping your face in the dirt and hoping that it goes away, of France, the deputy said, which is a very, very fair point. Now let's just watch this clip.
C'est d'ailleurs le choix fait pour les autres drogues légales, le tabac ou l'alcool.
Tobacco, alcohol.
Ce débat est donc crucial. C'est d'abord la santé de nos jeunes. Et d'ailleurs, le simple fait de montrer ce gobelet pourrait m'inquiéter. Je pourrais être inquiété pour montrer la légalisation du cannabis.
S'il vous plaît.
Le simple fait de sortir un joint
Lambert.
pourrait également créer des exploits.
Monsieur Lambert, il est
alors,
interdit par
monsieur le
notre
ministre,
règlement.
Monsieur Lambert.
Monsieur le ministre, prêt à un débat sans
Monsieur Lambert.
rationnel, loin des émotions. Merci.
Monsieur Lambert.
Je vous rappelle au règlement et ce sera inscrit au procès.
Now, love that. The stunt came on a day before a multi-party parliamentary report was released advocating for cannabis legalization. Richard Ferrand, this gentleman right here, Monsieur Lambert, president of the National Assembly, immediately censored Lambert for displaying the joint and raised a point of order that means the lawmaker could face a financial penalty. Whatever. This is bigger than a little tax penalty. So, gotta love that out of, enthusiastic, charismatic politicians that really want change for the better. And then lastly, hundreds seek help from Sterling Medical Cannabis Clinic in first week. Scotland's first legalized cannabis clinic has been endorsed by one of the SNP's most senior members after it welcomed hundreds of patients in its first week of opening. In March 2021, it announced Scotland was to get its first medical cannabis clinic after receiving approval from regulators. Sapphire Medical Clinic, based in Stirling, is the first medical cannabis clinic to be approved by Healthcare Improvement Scotland and will provide safe access to medical cannabis for patients in Scotland. Now, just to highlight, in the first week, the clinic welcomed more than 500 new patients from Scotland via remote telemedicine and consultation. So, however, once COVID restrictions are lifted, the clinic will also offer Scottish patients face-to-face appointments. Main thing though, 500 in the first week is a good turnout. It seems like they're fishing for demand. They're seeing that there is demand, and the more that these foreign governments, whether it's Israel, France, or Scotland, start trying this medical cannabis approach, the more open they're going to be to eventual recreational legalization. And we're seeing this happen in real time. So, Europe's next. We're watching the US right now. Canada's done it. So much change is happening, and I'm just honestly privileged and grateful that I can share this all with you. So lastly, before we go, this is the first episode of that Cannabis Investor series by the CSE, so the link is below if you want to grab it. Now, this was one snippet of it that I felt was worth sharing, because this, coming from the Vice President of Canopy Growth, tells us that Schumer intends to release his full-scale legalization bill in May. So let's just hear him say this. Now, obviously, we don't know if he's going to do it. Obviously, we want him to, but I think it's best to try and get any of your intel or your information, at least from people that are on the ground in the industry doing the work and actually know what they're talking about. So just wanted to present this to you before we go.
I'm playing around with the idea, not my own original idea, but that companies may not necessarily want full federal legalization. And the reason for that has to do with the business models that they've currently been working under, and that's within each individual state.
And of course, these are referring to U.S. companies, not Canadian ones.
And by opening up the states, they have to change their business models and all of those things.
Let me answer from my company's perspective first, which is Canopy Growth is 110% in favor of full comprehensive cannabis reform, which we expect to see the Senate introduce this May, and then potentially act on later this year. We certainly hope they will. Are we for?
So that's big. That means that they've intended and told these executives and these cannabis operators that we intend to introduce it in May. Hopefully, if all goes well, that means it will become law by the end of the year. And that's really what he just highlighted. So coming from, an executive in one of the Canadian LPs that's doing a lot of work because they have skin in the game in the U.S. to get it legalized, that says something.
Safe banking, absolutely. We're for that. But we have this really unique opportunity to go for full-blown reform this Congress, and we might as well take advantage of it. And it's important to do that because we can look back and we can start to repair the wrongs of the past in a very forward-looking way, right? So that's our belief as a company. Now, are there other companies out there that have a different belief? 100%. And why is it that they're concerned? They're concerned because of this whole idea that's within the U.S. Constitution. This is not something that Canopy came up with. It's called interstate commerce. And that's not going away.
So I'm going to leave you all at that. Let me know below if you have any questions, comments. Let's start a discussion. What do you think is going to happen as earnings kick off this week? Do you think the U.S. bull rally can continue, or do you think we're going to be stagnant for more time? Let me know. But if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. Subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and I will catch you next Wednesday for a midweek update, and I will definitely be coming at you, though, likely before then, with a video highlighting Harvest and Curaleaf's Q1 earnings. Have a great day, everybody.